Okay, let's start with a couple confessions this morning. Ed said that worship was good this morning. That's probably because you weren't seated near me. You know how you get caught up in a song and you've heard that song like on YouTube or a playlist of, I don't know, you guys, Spotify, what other, Apple Music, there's all sorts of stuff. What was the one that was like the free thing that people had what was it called? Live, no, before that, it was some like, what was it called? Napster. Do you guys remember Napster? Yeah. Oh man, whatever you're listening on or pirating your music from, whatever it is, we know where Ernie was at with that one. See, that was the confession. I was getting someone to. I get caught up sometimes thinking that I can do the part like the person in the song that you listen to. It just does not sound that way at all. So when I say it's good that you were sitting apart from me, I mean that. It was terrible. The other confession I have is we bring our Bibles up here oftentimes just as a show. And you're like, well, what do you mean? Well, the lighting up here and the words are really small now for me, now that I'm getting close to 50, and it's hard to read, to be able to really read it well. And I enjoy reading Scripture well when I read it in front of people. And it's hard to do, and I need to get bigger font. And that's a bad confession to have to make because I've been really striving to make it to 50 without needing glasses. And I might be a bit stubborn right now about this, that I probably do. So I actually have it larger size font on my paper, but I'm putting this here so that you know I got it from here. So that way you can see that that's happening. So that's another confession I wanna put out to you this morning. So good morning to you all. My name is Patrick. If you're visiting here at Mount Salem this week, I'm one of the pastors here at the church. Thank you for being here today and sharing of your time and worshiping together with us in this place. I'm glad you're here. If I haven't had a chance to shake your hand, I'll do it through the space and time right now, and I'll just say thank you for being here this morning. I'm glad you're here. How many of you enjoyed your Christmas truce? How many of you enjoyed your Christmas truce? Remember from Pastor Albert? He talked about on Christmas Eve that make tomorrow a truce day where we just put aside everything, the things that wind us up and get us agitated and off the mark where we should be, and just focus on what's important and focus on the meaningful things, focus on being together, focus on love. And loving your neighbor. I hope you enjoyed your Christmas truce. There's a lot more meaning to that. I will share that another time, but there's some pretty cool things that are happening, and Christmas truce is a part of them. So we're quickly approaching the end of 2024, and I wanted to share with you this morning some of the decisions that I made at the start of the year regarding my personal faith journey, and where those decisions have landed now that we are nearing the end of the year. So I don't know if this is like, my boys right now are kind of caught up in top 50 plays of 2024, and they love watching through the list. And when you said it's time to turn off the TV and you're at number 5, it doesn't go well, right? So it's kind of a year in review. One of the things that I used to do quite regularly as a new person to faith was to read through my Bible every year. I enjoyed it a lot. It was one of the things that was very important to me. I didn't start my faith journey experience until I was in my late teens. My family background is like post-Christian family from both my mom's British side and my dad's mess of Europe, Lithuania, Germany, whoever was winning at that time is kind of what you associate yourself to, depending on the wars and all that. So they were both kind of like post-faith. So my experience was very limited in terms of, God and spiritual things. So when I finally came to church and started into my faith journey, I felt very far behind the people that were in the church already, because I looked at them as people that had, grown up there. And they knew all the stories. They've read the book from cover to cover. They kind of get it. They knew the songs. They didn't even have to look at the hymn books. Remember hymn books? They didn't have to look at the hymn books. They just knew everything. And that was like, I had to try to keep up. And so reading my Bible cover to cover and learning those stories and going through was a very important thing for me when I started my faith journey. I found it very handy to be able to know what side of the page certain verses or stories were on. I always found that like very handy. It became very natural to be able to just have verses pop into your head when you're in conversations with somebody or when you're going through something and the Spirit just prompts a verse to you from the Proverbs or from the Psalms and it just kind of jumps out to you and you're like, oh yeah, and you can just turn there in your scriptures and you start reading, and it was something that was very important and personal to me. But through some very challenging circumstances, some of which you probably can relate to, I experienced what we would call some church hurt. What is church hurt? I don't know if it's a modern term. I don't know if you would look back in the dictionary and you go, church hurt. What is that? If you go back a few years, if you'd even find it in the dictionary, you probably wouldn't. But I experienced some church hurt. And you might be saying, well, what's that? I think it's kind of complicated to really define well, but I'll throw my 2 cents in and give it a shot this morning. I think church hurt is any pain, hurt, or abuse that is associated to the teaching, leadership, or people of a faith community. It can be something very real, or it could be the result of an expectation you had that was not met. I think both can be true. And that's something that I experienced. I think that's a definition that is lacking, because it's really hard to really define things well, which is interesting considering English has so many words. Just spend some time around Bobby and you'll realize that English has lots of words. Just kidding, Bobby. So I have not read my Bible through cover to cover since that experience. That's not to say I haven't read, studied, searched, learned, spent time with the Lord. It's not to say that. I just haven't done that very specific thing of reading it cover to cover, because in my head, I associated reading cover to cover together with the church hurt experience. So then that part of my faith experience just kind of got set aside. It got set aside. The hard part about that is, like, when you get like that bad taste in your mouth, and anytime you would start to enter into it, you would almost have that bad taste in your mouth again, and you'd be like, I don't want to deal with that every day, that bad taste that's still in my mouth from that experience. But in doing so, I also, without really knowing it, eliminated some other parts of my relationship with God because of that. And I didn't understand that at that time. It would be like saying, like, you're not going to enjoy a buffet because one of the options is something you don't like. For instance, liver. Yuck, right? Most people here would be like, oh, one of your options is liver. How many of you are like big fans of liver? I'm sure there's some here. Yeah, I would expect you, Nick. It's something that is very important. So, like, you're not going to stop eating the buffet just because over here there's some liver that you could choose. But that's kind of what happened in some of my experience. Or let's say there's like this item. Maybe you see some dough there that they've taken and they've put some cottage cheese into it and they've rolled it into a ball and they've boiled it. And then they're like, I'm not sure that tastes so good, so let's add some schmonfat or some jam. It'd be like that being in the buffet, and you're like, well, I'm not going to eat the rest of the food because that's in there, right? Nobody likes that stuff, right? Keep going and you're going to die. Truce. Relax, I'm just teasing. I'm just kidding about the liver. So towards the end of 2023, I felt the Spirit nudging me towards taking on a yearly reading schedule again. And I made the decision to find one that would work for me, that wasn't too burdensome. There's so many options and avenues that we have today. You used to have to like order one. Like the church would have like a Bible reading schedule that they'd print off and they'd have for people if they wanted to have one. But now the options are so many. For me, I went to the Bible app, and they have like a bunch of different selections you can have to be able to go through it for a year. I highly encourage you. It's a great way. Sometimes the notification notifications can be a little bit annoying, like, hey, your streak, you're at 7 days, and it's 10 o'clock at night, and it's trying to get you to open up the Bible app so that you'll continue your streak, right? Not knowing why you're not opening the Bible app that day, but it's prompting you. So there's some really good and positive things about that. But let me explain to you why this is a big deal, because you might be sitting there thinking, so I came to church today to hear this guy talk about why he decided to read his Bible cover to cover again. But for me, it's more than just reading my Bible cover to cover. And God knows this about me. He knows that when I have a dedicated time of reading, that I also become dedicated to having a conversation with him. And when that happens, I'm usually very present with him throughout the day. So the decision really wasn't about reading every day. It's a decision to having an intentional time with God every day. But the daily reading is my specific on-ramp to everything else. So I want to read to you one of my favorite stories from the Bible. And while David and Goliath is high on my list, side note about David and Goliath, let's pause for a second. But I was, I don't know what I was on Facebook or Instagram, but one of the reels that came up was, how like people are always speculating about different stuff in Scripture and about why it's there. What did Jesus write in the dirt when he was caught in that situation where they were trying to accuse him with the woman taken in adultery, and he just wrote on the ground, and preachers will speculate, I think he wrote their sins, or I think he wrote this, or it was something like all this stuff that everybody's trying to like put their 2 cents in. Well, this is like, this was a preacher, and he was like, I'll tell you why David chose 5 smooth stones. This was like, and I thought, okay, I'm going to listen. Like, I'm always wondering what, I don't know if people are just bored and they're trying to figure things out. I don't know. Or they're trying to have like a smart moment with somebody else, so they're trying to share their smart moment. And he's like, David got down to the river and he chose 5 smooth stones because one was for Goliath and the other 4 was because Goliath had 4 brothers. And he's like, that's why he took 5. And me, I'm simple. I think he picked up 5 just because that's how many stones fit in his hand. I was like, I'll take 5. I think he would just pick up 5. It just fit. It was like, that works for me. I can load up my sling and let her go. I'm down to 4. I still have, I feel like that's why he did it. But everybody's got like a theory. I've heard lots of theories. I mean, he only used 1, so why the other 4, right? If he's like a man after God's own heart, he should have just picked up 1 stone. So everybody's trying to answer these things. But that's what the reel said. And I don't know. So maybe you've been wondering why he had 5. That's according to this guy. That was his reasoning. So, all right, back to the sermon. So this story might be number 1 for me because I've shared with you guys before that I'm very much a narrative guy. I like stories. I like hearing people's stories, and I very much enjoy the stories of Scripture. And I enjoy doctrine, but I enjoy how doctrine and theology is actually played out in stories, because I feel like the living out of it is a way more greater way to understand it than just, this. For you to actually see how it plays out in life, I feel like really adds to my understanding. Otherwise, I don't really get it. So this is very much a narrative, and I've always had like this thing with the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. I love these 2 books together, written by Dr. Luke. They're 2 books in the Bible that I find very enjoyable to read. But this story might be number 1, and it's from the book of Acts, chapter number 27. So if you have your Bible app, if you have your scriptures, your paper scriptures, find kind of hilarious to say, because people would come to church all the time, and they never actually had everybody wouldn't come with their own Bibles. They would just have probably like the scrolls at the place of worship. And now we can come with our scrolls, our Bible, we can come with our Bible app, we can come with all this stuff. Open up to Acts chapter number 27, and to pick up in the story where we're at, Paul had gone to the temple. He'd been accused of the Jewish leaderships of causing a problem, and he got himself arrested. And through the different trials and circumstances, and realizing the direction God wanted him to go with this, he made an appeal to Caesar. And he's like, I want Caesar to hear my case. And as a Roman citizen, Paul had a right to make an appeal to Caesar to hear his case to be tried in Rome underneath the top authority of the land. So he makes his appeal to Caesar, and this is the story about him traveling from where he's at to Rome, where he will be for some time before making that appeal or before judgment is passed on him. So this is where it picks up, and I'm going to read the whole story here because I really like the narrative of it, and there's a lot to this story. So bear with me as I read through it. Acts 27, verse number 1. When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. We boarded a ship from Adrentheum. I feel like the Romans and the Jewish people competed for words that were hard to say. About to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia, and we put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. The next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius, in kindness to Paul, allowed him to go with his friends so that they might provide for his needs. Verse 4. From there we put out to sea again and passed to the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. When we had sailed across the open sea off the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy and put us on board. We made slow headway for many days and had difficulty arriving off Cnidus. When the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we sailed to the lee of Crete opposite Salmon. We moved along the coast with difficulty and came to a place called Fair Havens near the town of Lasea. So you can see this is a sailing adventure that they're on, and they're having difficulty because the weather is not really, it's not a good time of year to sail already, but they're trying to make their way to Rome. Verse 9, much time had been lost and sailing had already become dangerous because now it was after the Day of Atonement, so Paul warned them. He says, men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to the ship and cargo and to our own lives also. But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and the owner of the ship. Since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was a harbor in Crete facing both southwest and northwest. Verse 13, when a gentle south wind began to blow, they saw their opportunity, so they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. Before very long, a wind of hurricane force called the northeaster swept down from the island. The ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind, so we gave way to it and were driven along. As we passed to the lee of a small island called Cauda, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure, so the men hoisted it aboard. Then they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together, because they were afraid they would run aground on the sandbars of Syrtis. They lowered the sea anchor and let the ship be driven along. So it's like they lowered an anchor that would be kind of like a brake, not allowing them to be pushed so fast. We took such a violent battering from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. So they think the ship is too low. They're trying to raise it up so it's not so close to the waves. So they're throwing the cargo over now. Remember what Paul had said. This is not going to be good. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. That's like the extra stuff that they're not using to sail the ship. The extra ropes, the extra sails, like the tackle of the ship. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. After they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, and this is great, men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed. Last night, an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, man, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island. Verse 27, on the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea when about midnight, the sailors sensed they were approaching land. They took soundings and found the water was 120 feet deep. Now, I don't know what they're doing there, but that sounds like they understand some things. It's pretty cool. I don't know how you take soundings and figure out how deep the water is. There's a bunch of this stuff that I don't get. So if you're like an actual sailing person and you've spent time doing that, forgive me for how many mistakes I'm making. After a short time, they took soundings again and found it was 90 feet deep. So they figured out that they were getting closer to land. Fearing that we would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern, that's the back, and prayed for daylight. In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending they were going to lower some anchors from the bow, the front of the ship. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved." So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it drift away. Can you imagine? Your lifeboat's gone. Just before dawn, Paul urged them all to eat. For the last 14 days, he says, you have been in constant suspense and have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. Now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. Not one of you will lose a single hair from your head. After he said this, he took some bread and gave thanks to God in front of them all. Then he broke it and began to eat. They were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. Altogether, there were 276 of us on board. When they had eaten as much as they wanted, they lightened the ship by throwing the grain into the sea. Well, the grain is what they were going to eat next, right? They're going to make more bread from that grain. Now the grain's gone, all the cargo's gone, the tackle's gone. Now they're got anchors down and they're off some sort of land. I feel like for many of us, we've all faced some different storms in our life. We lose a job, a house, or we fail at something that we really needed to have a win at. Maybe our love is betrayed somehow. Maybe we have a season where we struggle through an emotional or mental health crisis. Or maybe a loved one is lost. For me, and what I've been discussing with you today, it was a church hurt that included all the above. The next part of the story is where I found myself in December of 2023, wanting to have that time with God again and not sure how to get there. I found myself off the coast of some land, dark, knowing that I needed to get to a place that I could put my feet down again. So let me read that next part of the story and then we'll break it down a little bit. When daylight came, they did not recognize the land, but they saw a bay with a sandy beach, where they decided to run the ship aground if they could. Cutting loose the anchors, they left them in the sea, at the same time untied the ropes that held the rudders. Then they hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the beach. But the ship struck a sandbar and ran aground. The bow stuck fast and the bow stuck fast, it would not move, and the stern was broken to pieces by the pounding of the surf. The soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away and escaping. But the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life and kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and to get to land. The rest were to get there on planks or other pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely. Now, I can't speak for you this morning, so I won't. But I'll speak to my own experience, and I'm hoping that some parts of it you might be able to relate to. So, in December of 2023, this is me. I found myself with a little bit of light shining into my heart, into that space that had been hurt. And I could see that this place was as good as any to be a landing spot for me to begin taking these steps again. But the truth was, just like this ship, my anchors were down. I had the rudder that steers the ship tied off, and the foresail was down because I wasn't going to allow some wind to push me in a direction I was not ready to go in. So how did I get to the land? Well, there's 5 points that I want to share with you. So just like the story, point number 1, I had to decide to cut loose the anchors. So the story read, cutting loose the anchors, they left them in the sea. I had to decide to let go of the things that were holding me there. For me, I had to let go of the feeling that I was blind to some things that others could plainly see. I had to let go of feeling stupid for missing so many warning flags. I had to be willing to ask for forgiveness for my stubbornness and pride because I thought I knew better when it became apparent that I missed something. for hanging on so long onto something that wasn't supposed to be. It sounds crazy, but I think God is more willing to forgive me than I'm willing to forgive myself. So if I'm going to get to where I'm supposed to be going, I'm going to need to cut those anchors free. I don't know what is anchoring you right now to where you're at and keeping you there from getting to where you need to be. It might be a friendship that needs to change. It might be a place of employment that needs to be quit or moved on from. It might be a habit that needs to be broken, an addiction that needs to be dealt with. It might be as simple as an apology that needs to be offered. How did I cut loose my anchors? Well, for me, it came through confession. It came through some inner healing. It came through some worship. It came through some teaching. It came through some time to rest and reflect. I cannot point exactly to what that specific thing was, but what I can tell you is that sticking with God and believing that he would do the work needed. Sticking with God and believing that he would do the work that was needed in my heart was something that was also important. I had to stick with him. So I had to cut the anchors. I had to let go of the regrets, the mistakes, the embarrassing decisions, and the anxiety that comes from letting go again. I don't know if there's any other anxious people here, but sometimes we don't make decisions because we're nervous about where those decisions are going to take us. The second part of that sentence that we read is equally important. In our story, they cut the anchors loose, and then they left them in the sea. You see, these anchors aren't the type that you bring back up onto the ship to be used later. Those past regrets, those past mistakes, those poor choices, those sinful actions, those anxieties, they are getting cut off and left behind. We often pull the anchors back on board and store them for later use. Regrets, sinful responses or decisions, past mistakes, poor choices, and the anxiety you can feel from those things, let them sink to the bottom of the sea where they cannot be used again. So what was next for me? Well, after I cut the anchors loose, number two, at the same time, they untied the ropes that held the rudders. I had to be willing to let the rudders free. What does that mean? Well, in our story, they tied the rudders off so they could not move. So the storm could not make the boat go in just any direction. They stopped the steering wheel from actually having an impact on the rudder in the back, which, helps the ship to move in the direction you want it to go. We often will take control of our life in such a way that ties off the rudder from God having any say in our direction. We not only limit our ability to steer the ship, but we remove anyone's ability as well. What ties the rudder in place? Well, my control does. My fears do. My self-determination. Since I allowed someone else to have say in my life, and that brought me to a place of hurt and pain, I will not allow that to happen again. And by default, that means God is limited, if not excluded as well. Lots of us can look like we have Jesus at the helm of our life. The helm of the ship. Those really cool steering wheels they have. He can look like he is at the steering wheel, but the rudder, the part that is not seen under the water, is tied off. So he can try to steer the direction, but this life is only going to go in my direction. So we got to cut the anchors, let go of what's behind. We got to untie the rudders. We got to put away the fear. We got to release control, and we got to open the opportunity up for God to move. Number three, what came next? Well, then they hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the beach. We got to raise the sail. I had to be willing to let go, to cut it free, and then trust again. Raise the sail. To get where you have to go, you have to gain some momentum. The boat isn't going to be steered unless it actually has some momentum. I heard a lovely old Jamaican lady once tell her husband that she can't follow a parked car. He's like, why won't you follow me? And she's like, I can't follow a parked car. That was a very polite way of saying, give me something to follow. Have a direction. Have some momentum. Get moving. and I'll follow. But right now, we're just out in the sea with the anchors down, the rudder tied off, and no sails. Abraham believed God and left everything to find a place that he had not seen. He raised the sail. Moses believed God and walked into the palace of Pharaoh, the most powerful leader of the known world, and said, "Let my people go." He raised the sail. David believed God and picked up the stones and went after that giant. He raised the sail. Mary believed God and said, "Let it be unto thy handmaiden, even as thou hast said." She raised the sail. Jesus believed God and said, "Into thy hands I commend my spirit." He raised the sail. Paul believed God and said they would all survive if they did it together, and they raised the sail. Look, the goal is to get to that place where you can put your feet down on the shore and fire up that journey with God again, to start walking with him again. And that's not going to happen unless you cut the anchors, loose the rudders, and raise the sail. So what happens next? I know it's all cliche and it sounds really good. Well, for some, it's as simple as that. You know, it's like the first-time parent whose kid sleeps all night long, and you're a first-time parent and your kid don't sleep, and they kind of look at you like, clearly you're doing something wrong. You know, and then they have kid number 2 or 3, and that kid won't sleep, and they're like, we might have been off. You know what I mean? You know, for some, it's easy. Things just seem like they just click, and everything works together, and that's fine. Like, blessings, that's awesome. But for many of us, what happens next is very much like what happened to Paul in the story. Number 4, the ship struck a sandbar and ran aground. Reality of our experience is not always nice and cute. They commit to getting to shore, and it does not go according to plan. As a matter of fact, our decision to let go, to cut loose, and raise the sail has resulted in us getting stuck again. We can whitewash our human experience as much as we want, but the reality is, for the vast majority of people, that life and our journey can sometimes just flat out suck. It just can. Faith experience is not always pretty. It's not. Sometimes it can be hard, complicated, come with hurts, sorrows, pain. People that you have an expectation of fail you. It happens. It can be hard. It can wreak havoc. It isn't pretty much of the time, but the anchors are gone. The rudder is free. The sail is up. Now you've done your part. What happens next is what trust is all about. Remember, the goal was to get to the shore. For me, my goal was to get back to this part of my walk with God. I can tell you as my year went along, I did not find it all appealing to be reading every day. And then I needed to get caught up. And then I would be ahead. And then I would find a good groove and settle in. But then I got stuck. And the days behind started to add up. 5 days missed. The app would be like, hey, you've missed. And I'm like, shut up. You've missed 10 days. 15. It wasn't pretty. I was struggling. I was struggling because I'd been reading and keeping up for the entire year, but I was yet to have those times with God that I remember from before. You know those times with God that are just like electric? I don't know how to define it. It's when the Spirit and you and God just seem to be in tune. You're synchronized. You're together. You just know you're in the presence of God, and that's like a place that it's like home. But I kept at it. And that's where we come to point number 5. The rest were to get there on planks or on other pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely. The plan to get to the sandy beach was the right one. It just didn't happen the way they thought. Acts 27:41 says, the bow stuck fast, it would not move, and the stern was broken to pieces by the pounding of the surf. The soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away and escaping, but the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life and kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and to get to land. The rest were to get there on planks or other pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely. If the goal was to get everyone to shore, did they meet the goal? The answer is yes. It just wasn't as pretty as running her into the shoreline and having everyone walk out the front of the boat all nice and dry. But they got there, all of them. Did I read or listen every day? No. Was I highly motivated to make it happen? No, yes, and kind of. You see, I can be very OCD about things, obsessive, compulsive. Like you get me locked on something, I'm gonna be locked onto it. Like I'm gonna, when it's go time, it's go time. It's like, this is what we're doing, okay, let's do it, and I can lock in. And for me, when I made that commitment, God knew that my OCD would lock me in, because I could see the end of the year coming, and I could see how many days I had left to read, and I could see what I needed to get done, and I could see that if I wanted to get there and accomplish what I agreed to accomplish, I'm gonna need to get going, and that would always draw me back in. Whether I was driving somewhere and I would put my phone into the holder and hit play and listen to it, whether I was fixing chairs in the church and listening to it, whether I was reading back in the back, whether I was in the shower with my phone stuck on the ledge by the shower, turned up as high as it could so I could listen to it as it didn't matter. My OCD was driving me to keep going. Remember, the goal is not perfection. The goal is direction, and that direction is to God. Looking unto him, looking unto Jesus, looking unto the author and finisher of our faith. You know, as the serpent is lifted up in the wilderness, Jesus said, so must I be lifted up. And what did they have to do with the serpent? They had to put their eyes onto it. It's the same thing with us. We have to look to Jesus. It's not perfection. You're not going to be perfect here. You're not. You can be declared righteous, but I guarantee you're not. At least not in the earthly reality in which you live. But you can have a right direction. And because I stuck with it, I was soon led to begin doing a daily study that involved reading and journaling in prayer time. You see, the anchors were cut. The rudder was free. The sails were up. I was moving in a direction. So now someone came along and said, hey, have you thought about starting this? Now I was already moving. So then when they spoke into my life, remember, now the helm is free to be able to steer the ship. And someone came along and said, hey, have you thought about this? Tilted the ship just a little bit to that direction. I was like, no, I hadn't. I'll start doing that. And I grabbed a book and I started journaling. And you know what my journaling looked like? I'm a big journaler. It was like, God said this. That was my first day. And my second day, it was pretty much the same. And my third day, it was pretty much the same. And after 2 weeks, I had 2 sentences. That's what happened. And then after 2 months, I had a half a page. And after 3 months, my page was full. Every day I would fill up this page of a conversation with God and what I was reading and what I was being asked to do. And all of a sudden, I started to have days where I felt like I was connecting with him, like I used to. But I had to cut the anchors. I had to cut free of those things that were holding me in place. I had to loose the rudder so the ship could be steered again. I had to raise the sail and get some momentum. We want everything to happen so fast. I do. Can't we just get there already? That was like me coming back from Prince Edward Island. You know what's frustrating now about driving a vehicle? You used to have the GPS thing, and when you set it in place, it would tell you your arrival time. And I'm like the prototypical dad. I look at the arrival time and I go, I'm gonna beat that. I'm gonna dial that time back. My arrival time is gonna be less, and then I'm gonna dial it back enough that I can factor in some stops for washing breaks, and then when we get back out to the car, I'm still ahead. Well, that Google thing updates that moment by moment now. It's factoring in traffic jams and it's not fair. It messes with you. Anyway, that's completely not the point. So As December hit, I was back to a daily time of walking and listening and connecting with God in ways that I've not had since my church hurt experience. And as of a couple days ago, I wanted to show you guys this. It even says, congratulations, plan completed. Look at that. And there's even like confetti. It's like New Year's came early. You know, woo, you did it, right? So I took a snapshot of that because I want to keep that. I want to keep that. Why do I want to keep it? So I can show off some goal to you? No, not at all. I took a snapshot of it because I wanted to be reminded. I wanted to be able to open that up and be reminded that when I make a decision to cut the anchors and loose the rudder and raise the sail, I want to be reminded that when I made that decision to once again try again, that God would be faithful to his part. That I could trust that he would get me to shore and help me to start walking again. So how about you? With our eyes looking ahead to 2025, has God provided you with a moment of light to see where you need to go? Do you remember from the story? Remember that they prayed for day? As we read through, it said that the people on the boat prayed for day because they hadn't seen the sun in so long, because the storm was so crazy. And then all of a sudden, the light shined through. You know, you might not think that God's listening to that little prayer, but that little speck of light will shine through. Has God provided you with a moment of light to see where you need to get to? As you sit here this morning, I want you to think, what's anchoring you? Are you willing to cut the anchor and leave them behind? You got your steering tied off? Are you willing to let the rudders loose and allow the direction to be changed? Man, that's hard. Are you willing to follow through and to raise the sail? Come on, God. Bring on the wind. It may not be pretty. In fact, it may end up looking pretty bad. That's okay. It's okay. It's probably pretty real then. But if you're willing to stick with it, you may finally get to where you've needed to be. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for 2024. Thank you for a year filled with challenges, opportunities, moments that were both exciting and also moments that were incredibly painful and hard. Thank you for both. Thank you for bringing us through both. Thank you that in success or in failure, you remain faithful. That you're at work, that you're right there beside us, even when we can't see you in the storm. God, I pray that this morning that you would just bless the people that are here today. I pray that they would sense your presence, your spirit. I pray that whatever has them anchored, tied off, or unwilling to lift the sail, that they would again be willing to hand that to you and trust you again today. It's not easy. Sometimes hurts go way deep. Pain is very real. We acknowledge that. It's very true. God, we pray that you would just speak into that.